cost you a separate fee, sort of separate from what you're paying for the data package? Will telecom service providers make it easier for you to access only those websites and apps that they want you to access? The Department of Telecom's just released report has both good news and bad news when it comes to net neutrality. To discuss that, I'm joined by Medianama's Nikhil Pahwa, the man who mobilized millions of supporters in favor of net neutrality. Good afternoon, Nikhil. Let's get down to the question that Anuj, sort of put to us, which is that if you were to sort of pay heed to what the DOT has recommended in its report, and it's only a report, it's not the final decision, would you say that WhatsApp messages, Skype calls, these would all continue to remain free?
So, I think, Menaka, there's no single answer to that question because they've looked at each of these aspects separately. WhatsApp messaging is going to remain unregulated, thankfully. But also in terms of VoIP or WhatsApp calling or Viber calling, international calls are going to remain open and free without license. But it's the domestic VoIP calling which they are bringing, which they want to bring under a kind of a regulatory framework. There seems to be a misconception here that they cannibalize on telecom operator revenues, because frankly telecom operators make money from data every time you make a WhatsApp call or a Viber call, and these services are actually cheaper for consumers, so that they benefit consumers. Just in terms of the pure regulation of messaging and calling, messaging remains unregulated, but they want calling to be regulated, and they want
only
WhatsApp
domestic calling, to be fair, Nikhil. So actually this DOT report
is
a big
absolutely
improvement.
Only domestic calling.
Yeah, this DOT report is a big improvement on the suggestions made in the TRAI discussion paper, which even indicated that maybe should we consider licensing all these OTTs, as they call it, or over-the-top apps that run on your phone, whether it's WhatsApp or Skype or Viber or any of that. At least this paper doesn't indicate any of that. In fact, it says that specific OTT communication services dealing with messaging should not be interfered with at all. Only in the case of VoIP, that is when you're making a domestic call using Skype or any other such app, then they're saying do not allow for regulatory arbitrage, because that puts the telecom service provider at a disadvantage. So it's not a clear win, but at least it's a better position than the TRAI discussion paper.
Oh, absolutely. But then, any position would be a better position than the TRAI discussion paper, because that paper was just, it was an extreme position and a position which, frankly, I don't think any regulator in the world should have taken or could have taken had they been operating independently, is the way I see it. It was just wild. But, that doesn't mean that the DOT report also doesn't have its own issues, because what they're saying is that zero rating is going to come under a regulatory framework where it will be approved on a case-by-case basis.
You want to quickly explain that to the rest of us, Nikhil? Dumb it down for us. What does zero rating mean, and why is it a problem if it comes under a permission or regulated framework?
So, frankly, in my opinion, zero rating should not be there, because what it means is that access to certain services becomes free for consumers, but it means the institution of a carriage fees for the internet businesses, or it means that they have to go through a content provider or a social network like Facebook, which might do a tie-up with the Reliance Communications. Invariably, it means that for all the internet businesses, in order to reach those consumers which are accessing the internet for free, they would either need to tie up with a telecom operator or with Facebook, or be in a situation where they might have to pay them for their service to be provisioned. So it's almost like converting the internet into a DTH service. And carriage fees don't really work for startups, just the way they don't work for TV channels as well. It puts them in the distributor in complete control of the content provider. And if our businesses in India have to succeed and become global businesses, they need less regulation in the country. So while it's going to be looked at on a case-by-case basis, frankly, in our opinion, zero rating should have been banned outright, because it means that there is additional discretion that the mobile operators have.
Sure.
And in this case, apart from the mobile operators having discretion, it also means that the regulator additional discretion.
Okay.
So
Nikhil, we're a slightly curious bunch here at
sure.
CNBC TV 18. While we are in favor of net neutrality and we'd back you if you launched yet another campaign against the DOT report as well, we're also concerned or interested in knowing how any of this will impact telecom revenues. So I'm going to take it back to my colleagues for just a second, and please butt in if I've understood this incorrectly. Essentially, that means that if they don't allow, if the DOT report becomes the final position, and they say, okay, let WhatsApp messaging continue, let Skype messaging continue, any kind of messaging format continue. It's only if you're using Skype to make domestic calls that's unfair. It's a regulatory arbitrage because that call is free for you even though you're paying for the data package, whereas otherwise if you were making a call through Vodafone or Airtel you would have to pay for it. So that regulatory arbitrage should be done away with.
But then
so to that extent there is a slight protection to the telecom guys' revenue.
Even if you're making an international call you would have to pay for it.
No, so for international calls they said let's be more liberal. They've said that for international calls, in case of OTT, VoIP, international calling services, a liberal approach may be adopted. They've said only domestic calls, so they're trying to protect the domestic call revenue.
No, Menaka, I tell you what, even I have an issue with that because a lot of us take plans, say Vodafone to Vodafone, in which actually for domestic calls we may not be paying too much, and while actually make a video call on Skype, actually I might be spending more via data. So, and why should I not be using
so the DOT is not suggesting that your ability to use Skype to make an international call should be regulated or priced at.
Domestic Skype call on video.
Yeah, so that's where they say that there is a regulatory arbitrage. That's where I'm sure Nikhil will disagree and all of us will disagree. Yeah, go ahead, Nikhil.
So the difference between using Viber and calling using the regular phone is that telecom operators have exclusive rights to spectrum, right? So if you make spectrum open enough and deregulate spectrum so that every app developer can buy access to spectrum and there can be a white label infrastructure provider for reaching consumers, we would not be having this argument. But the point is that telecom operators have exclusive access to spectrum, so they can't be treated the same as a Viber or a WhatsApp call because they're riding on the telecom operator network and consumers are paying for those calls.
Yeah, fair enough.
Right.
Nikhil,
so
we're about a million years away.
We're
about a million years away from liberalizing spectrum to that extent. I think we're at the end of our time. So I'll quickly ask you for a one-word description of this DOT report. An improvement on the TRAI discussion paper? Yes?
An improvement, but disappointing because they still are allowing zero rating in particular, and they're not, and they're looking to regulate domestic VoIP calls.
All right, great. From a telecom services or revenue point of view, the fact that they want to attempt to protect domestic revenue is a takeaway from the revenue point of view. And secondly, as Nikhil pointed out, what's a negative for consumers or for internet companies in terms of zero rating is actually a positive for telecom companies because then they're charging the, sort of the website to pay up. So.
Okay, I'm just happy that we don't have to pay for the WhatsApp messaging.
Not yet.
Not yet. That's what all of us use more frequently than calling at least. But thanks, Menaka, for joining us and decoding this for us. We have to wrap up with this segment. And as we do that, we'll take a look at how our participants on Bullseye